Hello, hello. We are reading the Saga of Gösta Berling, written by Selma Lagerlöf. And we've just come through the prologue. There were two sections to the prologue. And so now we've arrived at chapter 1 of the book, which is entitled The Landscape. Here we go, chapter 1 of Selma Lagerlöf's story, the Saga of Gösta Berling. Now I must describe the long lake, the fertile plain, and the blue hills, because this was the setting where Gösta Berling and the Cavaliers of Ekeby lived out their eccentric existence. The lake has its sources rather far up in the north, which is a splendid country for a lake. The forest and the hills never cease in gathering water for it. Streams and brooks tumble down into it year-round. It has fine white sand on which to extend itself, promontories and small islands to reflect and observe. Water sprite and sea witch have free rein there, and the lake quickly grows large and lovely. Up there in the north, the lake is happy and amiable. You need only see it on a summer morning, lying there drowsily under a veil of mist, to feel how merry it is. First it teases for a while, creeping slowly, slowly along out of its light covering, so bewitchingly beautiful that you hardly recognize it. But then with a jerk it throws off the covers and lies there exposed and bare and rosy, glistening in the morning light. But the lake is not content with this playful life. He laces himself up into a narrow sound, bursting forth through some sand dunes to the south, seeking a new realm for himself, and he finds such a domain. He grows larger and mightier, with bottomless deeps to fill and an industrious landscape to adorn. But now the water gets darker too, the shore less varied, the winds harsher, its entire character sterner. A stately, grand lake it is. Many are the vessels and log rafts that pass there. Only late does he have time to go into hibernation, seldom until after Christmas. He is often in a surly mood. The lake can churn white with wrath and wreck sailboats, but he can also lie in dreamy calm, reflecting the sky. But the lake wishes to travel even farther out into the world, although the hills appear more and more rugged and his scope more cramped the further down he comes, so that once again he must creep along between the sand shores as a narrow sound. Then he broadens out again for a third time, but no longer with the same beauty and majesty. The shorelines sink and become uniform. Gentler winds blow. The lake goes into an early hibernation. He is still lovely, but he has lost the frenzy of youth and the strength of his prime. He is a lake like any other. With 2 arms, he fumbles for the way to Lake Vänern, and when that is found, he plunges into the weakness of old age along steep precipices and goes with a final booming exploit into rest. The plain is just as long as the lake, but you might think that it has difficulty emerging between lakes and hills, all the way from the basin at the northern end of the lake, where it first dares to spread out, and then onward until victoriously it lies down in indolent repose by the shore of Vänern. It can only be that the plain would rather to follow the lake shore, long as it is, but the hills grant it no peace. The hills are mighty granite walls, covered by forest, full of gorges difficult to move in, rich in moss and lichen, in ancient days home to a multitude of wild animals. One often encounters a marshy bog or a tarn with dark water up among the extensive ridges. Here and there is also a charcoal stack or an open place where timber and wood have been removed, or a burned clearing. These testify that the hills can also endure work, but normally they lie in carefree repose, content to let shadows and daylight play their eternal game across their slopes. And the plain, which is pious and rich and loves work, carries on a constant war with the hills, all, by the way, in a spirit of friendliness. It is really quite enough, says the plain to the hills. If you place your walls round about me, that is security enough for me. But the hills will not listen to such talk. They send out long rows of hillocks and bare plateaus all the way down to the lake. They raise grand lookout towers on every promontory and actually leave the lake shore so seldom that the plane can roll in the soft sand of the lake bed in only a few places. Oh, that's no fun at all. The hills just don't leave the plane alone. The hills raise grand lookout towers on every promontory and actually leave the lake shore so seldom that the plane can roll in the soft sand of the lake in only a few places. Oh, it's so sad. But it does no good if the plane tries to complain. Be glad that we are standing here, say the hills. Think of the time before Christmas when, day after day, the deathly cold mists roll across Leuven. We do good service where we stand. The plane laments that it has little room and a poor view. You are stupid, the hills reply. You should just feel how the wind blows down here by the lake. At the very least, a granite back and a coat of spruce is needed to endure it. And furthermore, you can be content just looking at us. Yes, look at the hills. That is just what the plane does. It must sense all the marvelous nuances of light and shadow that traverse across them. It knows how, in the illumination of midday, they sink down below the horizon, low and pale light blue, and in morning and evening light rise to venerable heights, clear blue like the sky at the zenith. At times, the light can fall so sharply across them that they turn green or blue-black, and every single pine, every road and gorge is visible from miles away. It does happen in certain places that the hills move aside and let the plane come up and look at the lake. But once it sees the lake in its fury, as it hisses and spits like a wildcat, or sees it covered by the cold smoke that arises when the sea witch is busy with brewing and washing, then it quickly acknowledges that the hills are right and withdraws into its cramped prison again. From ancient times, people have cultivated the magnificent plain, and it has become a large district. Anywhere a river with its white foaming rapids throws itself down the lakeshore slope, ironworks and mills appeared. The river is important to get power for the ironworks and the mills. On the light open places where the plain comes up to the lake, churches and parsonages were built. But at the edges of the valleys, halfway up the hillside, on stone-covered ground where seeds do not thrive, are the farmyards and officers' quarters and an occasional manor house. I've been there, I've seen it. That's where the farms are, up in the hills, in the woods, up away from the lake and away from the plains. Yep. However, it must be noted that in the 1820s, the area was far from as developed as it is now. She was writing this in the 1880s. Yeah. So 60 years ago, it wasn't so developed as it is today. There was much forest and lake and bog then that can now be cultivated. The people were not as numerous either and made their living partly through transports and day labor at the many ironworks, partly by working in other places. Agriculture could not feed them. At that time, the residents of the plain, dressed in homespun clothing, ate oat bread, and were content with a daily wage of 12 shillings. There was great need among many of them, but that was often relieved by an easy, happy temperament and an inborn handiness and capability. But these three, the long lake, the fertile plain, and the blue hills, formed one of the loveliest landscapes, and still do, just as today the people are still vigorous, courageous, and talented. Now they have also made great progress, both in well-being and in education. May all go well for those who live up there by the long lake and the blue hills. And now I wish to relate a few of their memories. All right, that was it for the first chapter entitled The Landscape. We're just setting the scene for the rest of the book with this chapter. All right, we'll stop recording here.